Tony Randall wasn't just another actor. He was a superstar who brought charm, humor, and amazing performances to TV and movies for more than 60 years. People loved him most for playing Felix Unger in The Odd Couple. Everyone adored him, and critics praised his work too. But while his career was incredibly successful, his personal life got people talking a lot, especially his unusual marriages. For years, people gossiped about his choices. First, he had a long marriage with no kids. Then, he married a woman who was 50 years younger than him. Now, 20 years after he died, Tony Randall's wife is finally speaking up and telling everyone the real story behind all the rumors. Before we start, if you love Tony Randall, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Tony Randall was born with the name Ari Leonard Rosenberg on February 26, 1920 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He grew up in a world that felt too small for his big dreams. His parents were Moshe Rosenberg, who sold art and old treasures, and Julia Finston. They gave him a stable home, but they didn't really understand their son who loved the stage. One day he saw a traveling ballet show, and it changed his life forever. From that moment on, theater wasn't just something he liked. It was everything to him. But for young Ari, this love for acting was also really hard. He was great at copying people's voices and actions, which later made him famous. But his teachers at Tulsa Central High School didn't like it. They thought he was just causing trouble. Things weren't easier at home either. His father was a practical businessman who dealt with real, solid things. He couldn't understand why his son wanted to act. To Moshe, acting was silly and not a real job. The gap between father and son grew bigger and bigger, making Randall feel like he didn't belong in his own family. But he never gave up on his dream. After finishing high school, he went to Northwestern University for a little while to study speech and drama, but New York City kept calling to him. At a school called the Neighborhood Playhouse, he studied with famous teachers like Sanford Meisner and Martha Graham. Randall started turning the things people once called flaws into real talents. But the hurt from those early struggles never completely went away. His life changed a lot when he put his acting dreams on hold to serve in the U.S. Army for 5 years during World War II. Being in the military was nothing like being on stage, but it made him stronger and gave him a new way of looking at life. When the war ended, he had to start over. He carefully stepped back into theater at a small playhouse in Maryland. The stage became his safe place again, somewhere he could shake off the strict military life and remember how much he loved pretending to be different characters. With new determination, Randall finally went back to New York, ready to chase the dream that had survived all the misunderstandings at home, all the years of war, and all the pain of feeling different. It was the start of a journey that would take him far beyond being the boy that Tulsa never really understood. It didn't take long for Tony Randall to break into the world of performing. One of his first big chances came when he did the voice for a character named Reggie in a 1940s radio show called I Love a Mystery. The job was small, but for Randall it meant everything. It was the first hint that the dreams he had held on to through years of doubt might actually come true. From there, his journey from being unknown to being famous slowly started, not with quick overnight success, but with the slow, patient climb of a man who really loved what he did. By the mid-1940s, Randall had moved to New York, determined to make theater his life. In 1946, he traveled around performing in The Barretts of Wimpole Street, acting alongside the legendary Katharine Cornell. Soon after, Cornell picked him again for Anthony and Cleopatra from 1947 to 1948, where he performed with Charlton Heston and Maureen Stapleton. These jobs were more than just roles. They were like going to school. Each one made his skills sharper and gave him a place in the theater world that was finally starting to notice him. Television showed up as something brand new in the early 1950s, and Randall, who could adapt to anything, jumped right in. He appeared in One Man's Family, but his role as history teacher Harvey Westcott on Mr. Peepers from 1952 to 1955 was his real breakthrough. With warmth, humor, and a sweet charm, Randall showed audiences he could play characters who felt real, easy to relate to, and totally lovable. Still, theater kept pulling him back. In 1954, he took over for Gig Young in a play called O Men, O Women. But it was the 1955 Broadway hit Inherit the Wind that changed everything for him. He went from being a promising actor to a seriously acclaimed one. Playing the sarcastic journalist E.K. Hornbeck, who was based on a real writer named H.L. Mencken, Randall gave a performance that critics absolutely loved. He proved he could handle humor, smart dialogue, and serious emotions all at once. Hollywood came calling soon after. His first movie was O Men, O Women in 1957. But his role opposite Jane Mansfield in Will's success Spoil Rock Hunter really announced his arrival in films. He surprised a lot of people with how versatile he was, going from comedy in Rock Hunter to serious drama in No Down Payment that same year. By then, Tony Randall was no longer just some hopeful, unknown guy. He was becoming a real star. Even when things didn't go well, his talent kept shining through. In 1958, he went back to Broadway in a musical comedy called Oh Captain, a show that didn't make much money, but still got Randall nominated for a Tony Award. It proved that even when the show around him struggled, his amazing acting skills stood out brightly. By the end of the 1950s, Tony Randall had created a special place for himself in American entertainment. Everyone knew his face from Broadway, television, and movies. He was a man whose career wasn't built on sudden fame, but on years of never giving up, staying strong, and loving performing so much that it carried him through both good times and bad. His star was getting brighter, but underneath it all was still that boy from Tulsa. The one people didn't understand at first, who finally found a stage big enough for his dreams. Through the late 1950s and into the 1960s, Tony Randall's place in Hollywood kept growing steadily, making him one of the most reliable and talented actors of his time. What made him special was his amazing ability to move easily between fun, light comedy, and more serious, dramatic roles. He never let himself get stuck doing just one type of thing. In 1959, he charmed audiences alongside Debbie Reynolds in The Mating Game, where his adorable mix of awkwardness and honesty was impossible not to love. That same year, he joined Doris Day and Rock Hudson in Pillow Talk, a sparkly romantic comedy that became a huge hit. The chemistry between the three of them was amazing, and Randall went on to work with Day and Hudson again in Lover Come Back and Send Me No Flowers. This made him known as a master of classy, clever humor. But his talents went way beyond romantic comedies. He appeared in TV specials like The Secret of Freedom and The Man in the Moon, showing he could do well in all kinds of media. His performance as the king in The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn showed a darker side of him, while his creepy performance in Alfred Hitchcock's episode called Hangover shocked audiences with how intense it was. It showed there was something raw and real beneath his polished, smooth surface. Maybe his bravest work came in 1964 with 7 Faces of Dr. Lau, where Randall played 8 completely different characters. He played everyone from the mysterious Dr. Lau himself to mythical creatures like Pan and Medusa. The performance became one of his most famous achievements and proved he had limitless imagination and dedication to storytelling. As the 1960s went on, Randall kept balancing comedy and drama beautifully. He dealt with a playful genie in The Brass Bottle, put on the costume of Hercule Poirot in The Alphabet Murders, and continued his partnership with Doris Day and Rock Hudson in their last movie together. He never stopped doing theater either, briefly going back to Broadway and later appearing in sweet TV projects like The Littlest Angel. Tony Randall married his first wife, Florence Gibbs, in 1938, long before he became famous in Hollywood. Their marriage was quiet and lasted a really long time, over 50 years, until she died in 1992. Even though they never had children, Florence was his rock through the hard times of his early career and the crazy success that came later. When she died, Randall was heartbroken. It was one of the saddest parts of his otherwise celebrated life. The relationship between Tony Randall and Heather Harlan became one of the most talked about parts of his life. Not because anything bad happened, but because of the huge age difference between them. They were born 50 years apart. Tony was born in 1920, and Heather in 1970. When they got married in 1995, it shocked a lot of people. He was 75 years old, a famous star with decades of success behind him. She was just 25 and at the very beginning of her life. The age difference made people curious, got them gossiping, and made them doubtful. Some people wondered if a marriage like that could really be based on love. Others questioned why Heather would marry a man whose career had already made him a Hollywood legend so long ago. But beyond all the talking and rumors, their relationship was actually very different from what people thought. People who knew them talked about warmth, laughter, and a shared sweetness that went against all the negativity surrounding them. Tony himself often talked about their relationship with quiet happiness. He focused not on the years between them, but on the things they both valued and enjoyed together. Together they created a life that seemed surprisingly normal, filled with conversations, laughter, and the solid love of family. Their marriage gave Tony's later years new purpose when they had two children, Julia Lorette Randall and Jefferson Salvini Randall. For a man who had lived most of his life without kids, their births were gifts he treasured deeply. In them, he found a fresh sense of meaning and happiness, even as he knew he was getting older and wouldn't live forever. When Tony died in 2004, Heather inherited his money and property, which was worth over $1 million. But way more important than the money was the story they left behind. A love that lasted through people's doubts, challenged what people thought was normal, and proved that two people can sometimes connect even when they seem very different. Heather Harlan, born October 27, 1970, came into the public eye mostly through her marriage to Tony Randall. But her life had its own story before they met. She had worked in media and started her career as an intern at NBC, where she learned about broadcasting early on. But in 1995, her life took a different direction when she married Tony, a man 50 years older than her who was already a famous figure in American entertainment. After they got married, Heather decided to step away from pursuing a career. Instead, she dedicated herself to being a wife and mother. Her world centered around creating a warm, stable home, raising their two children, and being there to support Tony in his later years. Even though people publicly judged them for their age difference, people close to them often said their marriage was very loving and surprisingly well-balanced. Heather brought youth, energy, and friendship into Tony's final years, while he gave her a life filled with wisdom, commitment, and love. When Tony died in 2004, Heather had to deal with the sadness of losing her partner way sooner than most people do. But she kept his memory alive with quiet strength and dignity. She put her grief into protecting his legacy. She got involved in charity work, especially for causes related to arts and education, which were values that had meant everything to Tony during his life and career. Even though Heather never wanted attention or fame, her part in Tony Randall's story was huge. She wasn't just the person who took care of him in his final years. She was also the protector of the family they built together. Her story is one of quiet strength and loyalty, a reminder that love can shape someone's life just as much as ambition or fame can. One of the most surprising changes in Tony Randall's life didn't happen on stage or in movies, but in the quiet privacy of family life. After marrying Heather Harlan in 1995, Randall, who was already in his 70s, became a father for the first time. In 1997, when he was 77 years old, he had a daughter named Julia Lorette. A year later, at 78, his son Jefferson Salvini was born. Their arrival wasn't just a new chapter. It was an amazing reinvention of a man who everyone knew from playing sophisticated bachelor roles and delivering sharp comedy. Suddenly, Tony Randall, the experienced actor, was holding babies in his arms. The decision to become a father so late in life fascinated the public. Many people admired his choice, saying it showed his energy, liveliness, and determination to live life fully, even in what others thought of as old age. To them, Randall's joy in becoming a dad was a beautiful example of how love can change what people expect. But the decision also got criticized. Some people questioned whether it was fair to his children. They wondered if a man almost 80 years old could keep up with little kids, or live long enough to see them grow up. Others guessed that Heather might have a hard time raising such young children with a husband who was so old. But Randall never doubted his decision. For decades he had talked, sometimes jokingly, about how much he wanted to be a father. He once said, "I would love to have children, but I'm too old to have a wife." Finally, he had both a partner and a family, and he enjoyed it with a passion that surprised even his closest friends. Instead of apologizing, he celebrated the good things that came from being older. He had patience, gratitude, and wisdom that he might never have had as a younger man. For Randall, these weren't bad things. They were gifts he could give to his children. Still, underneath the happiness was a quiet sadness. Randall knew his time with Julia and Jefferson would be short. Heather later said that he was almost obsessed with recording their moments on video, making films of himself and the family so his children would one day have moving pictures and memories of their father. He wanted them to know him, she explained, knowing that their years together would be limited. When he died in 2004, Julia was only 7 years old, and Jefferson was just 6. Heather faced the hard job of raising their children while keeping Tony's memory alive without drowning in sadness. "I didn't want to make the house a shrine and keep the pain so present," she admitted. Instead, she found balance, holding on to the stories and laughter without letting sorrow take over everything. Friends like Jack Klugman and Gary Marshall often came to visit, sharing warm and funny memories of Tony. This way, the children would grow up surrounded not by emptiness, but by living echoes of the father they lost too soon. In the end, Tony Randall's late jump into fatherhood stayed both controversial and deeply touching. It went against what people expected, started debates, and yet in its personal nature showed something everyone can understand. Love and family don't follow a schedule. For Julia and Jefferson, his time was short, but his love was lasting, saved in stories, in videos, and in the unbreakable love of a father who became a dad against all odds.